I remember that night like a scar pressed into my bones. The living room wasn't just a room, it was an arena. My sister, Amber, stood there smirking, clutching the necklace I had bought for myself after months of overtime at the diner. "Looks better on me anyway," she sneered, tilting her chin like a queen who never earned her crown. I reached for it, voice shaking. "Amber, give it back. That's mine." She shoved me, hard enough that my back hit the wall. "You don't get it, do you? Everything in this house belongs to me. Dad said so. Mom said so." I felt the heat of anger rise in my chest. For once, I didn't back down. I pushed her hand away and snapped, "You're not entitled to everything just because you're their favorite. I worked for that. Please subscribe to our channel and tell us in comments from where are you watching this video." That was when Dad stormed in, his boots stomping heavy against the floor. His face twisted in disgust, not at Amber, but at me. "Fighting with your sister again?" he barked. "You never learn, do you?" "I'm not fighting, Shut your mouth," he roared, cutting me off. His hand clamped around my arm, dragging me out into the backyard. The cold air stung my skin, but worse was the dread building in my stomach. Amber followed, laughing under her breath like she already knew what was coming. By the woodpile sat a stack of bricks left over from Dad's half-finished patio project. He grabbed one without hesitation. My heart hammered in my chest as I realized what he intended. "Dad, please," I begged, voice cracking. "I didn't do anything." His eyes burned with a cruel satisfaction. "You think you're worth something? You think your whining makes you equal to your sister?" He raised the brick high above his head. "Let me remind you what useless things deserve." The crack of impact against my knees was a sound I'll never forget. A sharp, sickening thunder that ripped through my body. White-hot pain exploded, and I collapsed to the ground, screaming, my vision blurring with tears. Amber's laughter pierced the night. Mom appeared at the doorway, arms folded, not rushing to help, not even shocked. She smirked and said in that mocking drawl I'd grown up with, "That's what useless things deserve. Broken things belong on the ground." I tried to crawl away, but the pain was unbearable. My legs wouldn't respond. Dad stood over me, brick still in his hand, and spit near my face. "Now, maybe you'll stop standing in your sister's way. You'll remember your place." Amber crouched beside me, her perfume choking me as much as her words. "Guess you'll never walk properly again. Perfect. Now you'll look as worthless as you always were." I lay there in the dirt, clutching my knees, every breath ragged and shallow. My own family stood above me, not as protectors, but as predators. And as my cries echoed into the night, no one came, no neighbors, no friends, just them, my parents laughing, my sister sneering. It was in that moment, through the blur of agony and betrayal, that something inside me hardened. A seed was planted, watered by humiliation and pain. They thought they had broken me, reduced me to nothing, but what they didn't know was that useless things can still find a way to cut deep. And I promised myself, right there on the cold ground, that one day they would learn what it felt like to be worthless. The weeks that followed were a blur of pain and silence. My knees throbbed with every movement, the bruises deep purple fading into sickly yellow, and I dragged myself around the house like a ghost. Amber paraded past me daily, jingling the necklace she stole like a trophy. Dad didn't bother to hide the satisfaction in his eyes when he saw me limp. Mom only muttered, "At least now you won't wander around pretending you're something you're not." They thought I'd be quiet. They thought I'd fold. But my silence wasn't surrender, it was calculation. I spent hours in my small bedroom, the one they joked was closer to a closet than a room. While I iced my knees, I listened. To their conversations, their arguments, their careless words that revealed more than they realized. I learned that Dad had been drowning in debt, desperate enough that he'd forged paperwork under a neighbor's name. I overheard Mom on the phone, begging her sister for money while pretending everything in our home was perfect. And Amber? She wasn't as untouchable as she wanted me to believe. Her grades were failing, her friends drifting away, her life one slip away from crumbling. I took it all in, detail by detail, feeding the fire inside me. At night, when the house was dark, I forced myself to stand. The pain was brutal, every step like a nail driven into my joints, but I wouldn't let it win. I moved slowly, clinging to walls, training myself to walk again. Each painful shuffle was a promise. They would see me rise. One evening, as Dad sat drunk on the couch, bragging to Amber about how real power is making people fear you, I stood in the hallway, gripping the doorframe so hard my nails cut into the wood. His words rang in my ears, not because I feared him anymore, but because they gave me clarity. Fear was his weapon, silence was Mom's, cruelty was Amber's, but mine would be patience. I started working at the library downtown under the guise of community service hours. Mom didn't ask why, and Dad didn't care. They thought I was just desperate to keep busy. But what I was really doing was building connections quietly. I helped the staff organize financial records, sorted files, and slowly learned how information could be traced, how debt could be documented, how lies could be exposed. With every passing day, I hid my intentions behind a blank expression. When Amber mocked me for limping, I smiled faintly, like her words didn't sting. When Mom complained about bills, I offered to take the trash out, feigning obedience. When Dad glared, I lowered my head, but inside I was memorizing every weakness, every blind spot. They believed they had beaten me into submission. What they didn't realize was that they had created someone who was no longer afraid of their cruelty. One night, I lay awake, staring at the cracked ceiling, listening to Amber's laughter seep through the walls. I pressed my hand against my knee, still aching, and whispered to myself, "They called me useless. They laughed while I bled. But when I'm finished, they'll be begging for mercy they'll never get." And slowly my plan began to take shape, not loud, not obvious, but sharp, silent, and inevitable. The girl they tried to break was gone. What remained was someone far more dangerous, someone who had nothing left to lose. The day of reckoning didn't arrive suddenly. It came in quiet pieces, like dominoes toppling one by one until the whole house of cards collapsed. It began with Amber. She strutted around like the princess of the family, tossing her hair and sneering at me every chance she got. But I'd overheard her secret. She'd been skipping classes, lying about grades, and using money Dad didn't have to fund her little shopping sprees. She thought nobody knew, but I did. So, one morning, when she left her phone on the table, I quietly slipped in the notes I had gathered. Screenshots of failing grades, notices from the school, and photos of her sneaking out at night with boys my parents despised. I sent them to Dad's phone from an anonymous account. That night, the house shook with shouting. "You're supposed to be the future," Dad roared. "And you're out there flunking like some gutter kid?" Amber cried, but for once, no one came to shield her. Mom tried, but Dad slapped the table and yelled, "Shut up, Linda, this is your fault for spoiling her rotten." I listened from my room, clutching my knees, the ache still alive but dulled by satisfaction. It was only the beginning. The next move was Mom. She'd spent years telling me I was worthless, a burden, a mistake that should have been corrected early. Her poison was sharper than Dad's fists because she dressed it in a sweet smile when outsiders were around. But I had her secret too, the loan she'd taken from her sister, a loan she never repaid. I had copies of the emails, her promises, her begging words. At the right moment, I forwarded them to my aunt. Within hours, Mom's phone exploded with angry calls. I heard her stammering excuses, her fake tears, her desperate pleas. My aunt showed up at the door the next day, red-faced, yelling, "You think you can humiliate me like this? You paraded around while I covered your lies? Pay me back now!" Mom's mask cracked. Her little kingdom of control slipped, and for the first time, I saw her cornered. She glared at me across the room, suspicion burning in her eyes, but I only lowered mine and limped past like the obedient daughter she always wanted. Inside, I was smiling. But Dad was the final strike. He was the monster who smashed that brick onto my knees, laughing as my body crumbled. He was the one who whispered to Amber, "See, That's how you keep garbage in line." He thought he was untouchable, but his debts told a different story. Through the library job, I discovered the forged papers. The neighbor whose name he used had already begun asking questions. All it took was one carefully placed envelope slid under the right door to set everything in motion. The morning the police came, Dad's face drained of color. He tried to bark orders, tried to shout, but the officers ignored him as they read out the charges. Forgery, fraud, theft. His empire of fear collapsed in front of us all. Amber screamed. Mom wailed. And me? I stood at the top of the stairs, knees aching but strong enough to hold me upright. Dad looked up at me as they cuffed him. His eyes narrowed, suspicion flashing, but he couldn't say a word. For the first time, his power was gone. After they dragged him out, silence filled the house, a silence that felt like justice. Amber turned on me, her face red, tears streaking her cheeks. "This is your fault! You ruined everything!" I stepped closer, my limp still there but lighter, less noticeable. My voice was steady, calm, terrifying in its quietness. "No, Amber. He ruined himself. Mom ruined herself. And you? You were never more than a spoiled brat who thought cruelty was strength. I didn't break this family. You did. I just showed you the truth." Mom collapsed onto the couch, sobbing. "We're ruined. Everything is gone." Looked at her for a long moment, then whispered the same words she once spat at me. "That's what useless things deserve." For weeks after, the house became a shadow of itself. Dad rotted in a cell, his name dragged through the mud. Mom became the subject of gossip, people whispering about her debts and her hypocrisy. Amber? She tried to cling to her old friends, but one by one they abandoned her. And me? I walked slowly, steadily into my own future. My knees still carried scars, but they carried me. Each step hurt, but it was proof that I had survived. Sometimes, late at night, I would sit by the window and let the cool air brush my face. I'd think of that moment, the brick, the laughter, the cruelty, and I would smile, because they thought they had destroyed me, but in the end, I destroyed everything they loved. Not with fists, not with screams, but with patience, with truth, with justice. And that was far sharper than any brick could ever be. Please subscribe to our channel and tell us in comments from where are you watching this video.